Hello and welcome to another episode of Chuchu, a-changin. And on this episode we are going to be continuing our albums of the year list, and this time it's 1964. And yeah, so the fun begins. The Beatles have kicked the recording industry into a frenzy and cultural changes afoot as the Beat generation moves into centre stage. Of course, this is all very much still first gear stuff back in 64, but at least the motor is finally running. So, without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are my personal top 10 albums of 1964. So, we're going to be kicking off this list with the self-titled debut album by the Kinks. After the Beatles smashed all kinds of records with Please Please Me, the hunt was on for the next big British mega success, and 64 saw bands like the Kinks and the Rolling Stones burst onto the scene, albeit moulded in a distinctly Beatlesque kind of way. The Stones LP is sadly not making this list as it only had one original on it, and as good as Tell Me is as a song, it's just not enough to carry an entire album. But the Kinks have a similar problem on this record, as their potential to climb higher on this list is curtailed by too many underwhelming covers, such as Cadillac, Long Tall Shorty or Too Much Monkey Business. But on the flip side, all the originals point towards the band's potential. So Mystifying has a great twisting guitar riff and is very catchy. Just Can't Go to Sleep has a sweetness to its wiry balladry. Stop Your Sobbing has an almost Beach Boys kind of vibe to it, and I love the way that Ray Davies' voice wobbles during the chorus. Of course, the peak of the album comes via You Really Got Me, which is arguably the first punk song ever recorded, with Ray achieving the legendary guitar tone by taking a razor blade to his amp speaker cone. It must have sounded absolutely brutal back in 64. So yeah, this is a good if imperfect start for the Kinks, and as anyone who regularly watches this show will know, you can look forward to seeing quite a lot of the Kinks as these lists progress because, well, I'm a pretty big fan of the Kinks. Next up we have All Summer Long by the Beach Boys, who have steadily continued to improve since their debut. And here we have a very frustrating yet hopeful LP, as this is 70% of a really great album and 30% of an absolutely terrible one. The good stuff first. I Get Around is an instant classic with its iconic falsetto and vocal harmonies. All Summer Long is nice and jaunty with its bouncing marimbas. Tracks like Hushabye, Girls on the Beach and We'll Run Away feel like a dry run for Pet Sounds, while Wendy is another great addition that impresses with those giant walls of harmonised vocals. But alas, there's rot here too. The lyrics on Do You Remember, which reels off a bunch of rock and roll history, is just way too on the nose and puts my teeth on edge, as does the lyrical portion of The Drive-In, which is just very annoying indeed. Meanwhile, the last two tracks are just genuinely awful. Our favourite recording sessions is just a tossed off series of studio bloopers that bring the LP to an absolute grinding halt, while closer Don't Back Down has some terrible pitchy vocals that are just like nails on a chalkboard. So yeah, I mean, if the last two tracks on this were erased from existence and the occasional lyrical blunder was tidied up, this might have been one of the Beach Boys' best efforts. As it is, there's still enough great material here for this to be making the list, but it's far from perfect. Next up we have 5 by Joan Baez, which was bizarrely her second album, not her fifth. And here we have more traditional sounding finger-picked folk, with some unexpected detours into opera and flamenco, which really helps to set the album apart. Tracks like Dare But For Fortune and Stewball have an easy catchiness and relaxing vibe to them. Joan's version of Dylan's It Ain't Me Babe is one I actually prefer to the original, as her voice holds a better melody than hoary old Bob. Her flamenco edition, O Cangaceiro, adds a bit of spicy variety to the track list. Birmingham Sunday is lovely with its subtle quietness and traditional Irish melody, while Bachianas Brasileiras No. 5 impresses no end with its classical strings and operatic bombast. So yeah, this is a lovely folk LP with some interesting twists and turns. Good stuff from Joan Baez.
Show me the train. Show
Coming in next, we have The Very Thought of You by Ricky Nelson, and a quick shout out to Ricky Nelson as he's proven himself to be an extremely reliable hand during these early 60s lists. He's always there with something solid and entertaining. And so it is here again in 64 with this LP. And what we have here is yet another album of tuneful, consistent 1950s style rock and roll. Opener My Old Flame has an odd off-kilter aspect to it that makes the composition way more interesting. The Loneliest Sound is a nice romantically broken ballad. Title track, The Very Thought of You, has an earworm chorus that subtly spreads and infests your cerebral cortex, while closer Dinah is a beautiful piano closer that has a lovely vocal cadence on lines like Dinah, with her Dixie eyes a-blazing, how I'd like to sit and gaze in. I mean, as a Morrissey fan, I just can't resist vocal hooks like that. It's just hardwired into my DNA. So yeah, whilst not gonna knock anybody out of their boots, this is yet another good record from Ricky Nelson, who I only just learnt died in a tragic airplane crash along with his bandmates. And what is it with this era and plane crashes? John Denver, Buddy Holly, Ricky Nelson, I mean Jesus, I'm never getting on an airplane ever again.
Because my dynamite changed her mind about me.
Next up, we have Meet the Temptations, which was the Motown Hit Machine's debut LP. Although this was more of an early singles compilation than a studio album. That said, the difference between studio album and compilation is frankly negligible in the early 60s. And here we have a really consistent and upbeat R&B and soul record with some spectacular vocal work and an alluring rhythmic thrust. High spots include the opener, The Way You Do the Things You Do, which is immediately in there with those triumphant horns and hand claps that never fail to bring out the sunshine. I Want a Love I Can See has a classic and catchy R&B groove. May I Have This Dance has a fun bandstand feel to it with some interesting vocal gulps and yelps. Just Let Me Know is full of jangling guitars and toe-tapping bass, while Your Wonderful Love is a swooning 1950s waltz-time ballad. So yeah, this album really feels like it's pushing R&B onto new levels of quality, and it's no wonder that the Temptations would go on to be one of the most legendary acts of the genre. So, we're going to be kicking off the top 5 with Beatles for Sale, which was the Fab Four's 4th LP. And yeah, like I said before, the Beatles don't have any bad albums, but this is certainly among the band's weaker records. And it's down to that old early 60s chestnut of just having too many covers. This time is especially disappointing as the band's previous LP, A Hard Day's Night, had been comprised entirely of originals. But that's not to say that the covers completely suck, it's more of a kind of mixed bag type of situation. The Chuck Berry cover, Rock and Roll Music in Kansas City, Hey 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 Hey, have a boisterous, catchy energy to them, while Mr. Moonlight is so much inside the Beatles' wheelhouse that I was surprised to find out that it wasn't an original. On the flip side, both figuratively and literally, you have the Buddy Holly cover, Words of Love, as well as covers of Honey Don't and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, which just feel like really tame fillery additions and don't rise to the lofty expectations you place on the Beatles. But as usual, the originals are uniformly excellent. No Reply is just totally awesome, presenting a new weary darkness to the band and kicking ass with its explosive chorus. I'm a Loser is a catchy addition with some cool arpeggiated guitar work. Follow the Sun is delightful with its folky fingerpicking and tumbling melody. 8 Days a Week has an irresistibly iconic sing-along nature, while I Don't Want to Spoil the Party sees Lennon subtly offering insights into his feelings about being an overworked, oversold Beatle at the time, with lyrics like, "There's nothing for me here, so I will disappear," hanging in the ether. So yeah, Beatles for Sale is not one of the band's strongest moments, but it still is a fine album that hints at new levels of maturity, and is a very easy placing on this list. Next up, we have Where Did Our Love Go by girl group The Supremes, which was their second LP. And this is a pretty darn good R&B pop album that hits new heights for the genre and trailblazes the way forward. Opener and title track Where Did Our Love Go has an iconic pop march to it, as does the bouncingly catchy Baby Love, which is simply one of the most famous girl group tunes of all time. When the Light Starts Shining has a fun bombastic energy to it. Come See About Me has a pristine pop groove that teases out some blue skies despite its downbeat lyrics, while the STD anthem Kiss of Fire has some impressive vocal gymnastics and some fun percussion blasts. I mean, hey, I can give you some crabs to go along with that Kiss of Fire if you want, Miss Ross. Nah, I'm just joking. She's really old these days. So yeah, this is a remarkably consistent pop record that delivers exactly the kind of hits that you'd want from this kind of music. Great stuff. Coming in third place and taking home the bronze medal, we have Oh Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison. So here we start to head into dubious chronological waters a bit. Originally, Oh Pretty Woman was released in the UK only as a compilation to cash in on the hit single of the same name. The next year, Roy followed it up with the studio album Orbisongs. Yet at some undisclosed moment in time, it seems that Roy amalgamated the two projects, adding the best tracks from Orbisongs onto this compilation and then phasing out the Orbisongs album completely, leaving this as his only readily available record from the period. So although this was released in 1964, it has undoubtedly been tampered with since then. But I don't care because, I love this record. In fact, if you're looking for the most immediately accessible way to dive into Roy's music, this LP right here is the ticket. Title track Oh Pretty Woman is obviously Orbison's most iconic song, and it's a fantastically catchy pop masterpiece from the moment it opens with that super famous twisting guitar riff. Born on the Wild has an exciting mariachi flavour to it and some great operatic backing vocals. It's Over is a gorgeous sweeping ballad with a spectacular climax, and speaking of climaxes, the crescendo on The Crowd is just insanely epic. Indian Wedding has a beautiful dovetailing melody and a fun sense of theatricality, while I Get So Sentimental has an iconic glide to its 1950s croon. So yeah, there's certainly a case to be made for this record's disqualification, but why would you when it's just so damn good? Wonderful stuff here from sneaky cheating Roy Orbison. Mercy! Silver medal time, and the silver medal is going to go to The Times They Are a-Changin by Bob Dylan, which was his third LP and one of two albums from him from 1964. The other one, Another Side of Bob Dylan, is also pretty good, but of the two I slightly prefer this one, so this is what's making the list, even though Another Side of Bob Dylan is actually probably good enough to be in this year's top 10. But to be honest, I just can't be bothered to talk about three stripped back folk records on the same list. Blame that cheeky backslider Orbison for stealing your spot, Bob. Anyway, here we have yet more acoustic guitars, harmonica, husky vocals and advanced lyricism. And there's much more of a political torch song bent to this particular LP, but that's its charm point. Opening track and title track The Times They Are a-Changin has an iconic wispiness to it, as Bob sings about the changing culture and those that drown if they don't move with the flow of time. With God on Our Side has a sorrowful lilt to its chord sequence, as Dylan laments upon the hypocrisy of warmongers inciting the will of God. Only a Pawn in the Game has a distinctive melody and interesting lyrics about politicians glorifying black combatants in the Civil War for political gain. North Country Blues weaves the tale of the economic destruction, bereavement and loneliness of an old mining town, while Boots of Spanish Leather has a resigned texture and lyrics dedicated to heartbreak and slowly waning love. So yeah, this is the best early folk record by Bob Dylan in my opinion. It's pretty great and a very easy addition to this list.
Shake your windows and write on your walls, for the times they are a-changin'.
So here we are at the top of the mountain, and the gold medal for 1964 is going to go to A Hard Day's Night, which was the third LP by the Beatles, and the first to be entirely comprised of Lennon-McCartney originals. And it was also a soundtrack album for the film of the same name, which was a movie that broke new cinematic ground by having the Beatles play fictionalised versions of themselves, a twist which riled both audiences and critics back in '64. And on this record we find the Beatles perfecting their pop sound, with more confident songwriting and slicker production, and yeah, it's just pretty much the perfect album. Highlights and an easy 5-star banger include the opening title track A Hard Day's Night, which pushes on the band's songwriting to new heights of iconic pop glory. I Should Have Known Better is a sprightly addition with some simple but memorable harmonica riffs. If I Fell and I Love Her have swooningly gorgeous melodies for days and a lovely lilting sadness to them, and I really love the mournful folk guitars on the latter in particular. Can't Buy Me Love has a nice rock and roll twang and a bopping pace, although I'm fairly sure money can buy you love in certain shady parts of town. I mean, just ask Hugh Grant for more information. Anytime at All is an absolute banger with its stomping catchiness, and the way it seesaws between the melodically sweet verses and growling chorus is really cool. While When I Get Home has some awesome wiry guitar work and explosive drum fills that give the track a sense of toe-tapping energy and also a slight frisson of menace. So yeah, I'm merely scratching the surface, as each one of the record's 13 tracks has something good to offer. This is a superb LP that helps solidify the trend of bands being allowed to write their own material. It's absolutely wonderful and my pick for the best album of 1964. And that's it, that's my list. But of course that won't be your list, so please sound off in the comments section and tell me your own top 10 of 1964. Like, share, subscribe and all that other kind of YouTube jazz. Feel free to check out the official Chuchu is a Ranker Spotify playlist for this episode, links in the description below. Make sure to take care of yourself, but most importantly, just keep on ranking!
I'll get you anything, my friend, if it makes you feel alright. 'Cause I don't care too much for money. Money can buy me love. I'll give you all I got to give if you say you love me too. I may not have a lot to give, what I got I'll give to you. But I don't care too much for money. Money can buy me love. Buy me love. Everybody tell me so. Can buy me love. No, 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 no. Say you don't need no diamond ring, and I'll be satisfied. Tell me that you want that kind of thing the money just can't buy.